I paid for the whole family trip for Christmas, and they told me to stay home next year because they needed young energy. The words cut through me like Chicago's winter wind, sharp and merciless. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Eleanor, and I'm 72 years old. I've lived in Chicago for most of my adult life, watching this city transform from industrial powerhouse to gleaming metropolis. But that Christmas night, sitting alone in the expensive Lake Michigan Airbnb I had rented for my entire family, I felt smaller than the snowflakes gathering on the frosted windows. The text message from my daughter Sarah had arrived at 11:37 p.m. on December 25th. I remember the exact time because I was staring at the clock, wondering if anyone would call to say goodnight, to thank me for the trip, to acknowledge that I had spent my entire retirement savings to bring us all together. Instead, I got those 8 words that would change everything. Mom, maybe next year you just stay home. We need young energy for these trips. I set my phone down on the marble kitchen counter with trembling fingers. The silence in that beautiful rental home was deafening. Earlier that evening, I had watched through the floor-to-ceiling windows as my children, their spouses, and my grandchildren laughed and took selfies by the Christmas tree I had decorated alone while they were out exploring the city without me. The smell of the prime rib I had cooked still lingered in the air, mixed with the pine scent of the 12-foot Fraser fir I had insisted on. I had worn my best red sweater, the cashmere one I had saved for special occasions, and my mother's pearl earrings. I had wanted to look festive, wanted to fit in with their energy. But when I suggested we take a family photo by the fireplace, my son Michael had sighed audibly and said we could do it later. Later never came. Now, surrounded by the remnants of what I had hoped would be a magical Christmas, I felt like a stranger in my own family story. The presents I had carefully wrapped sat under the tree, some still unopened. The expensive wine I had chosen to pair with dinner remained mostly untouched. My children had been too busy posting on social media to notice the effort I had put into every detail. I walked to the living room and sank into the leather armchair facing Lake Michigan. The city lights twinkled like fallen stars across the dark water, but their beauty felt hollow. In my lap, I held a small photo album I had brought to share memories with my grandchildren. Pictures from their childhoods, family vacations, birthdays, graduations. Moments when I thought I mattered to them. How had I become the burden in my own family? For 43 years, I had been the foundation everyone built their lives upon. When my husband Robert lost his job during the recession of 2008, I worked double shifts as a nurse at Northwestern Memorial Hospital to keep our family afloat. My feet would ache so badly I could barely walk to the car after 16-hour days, but I never complained. The money kept coming in, the mortgage got paid, and my children never missed a meal or a school activity. When Sarah decided to study art history at Northwestern, I liquidated my modest stock portfolio to cover her tuition. When Michael wanted to start his landscaping business, I co-signed loans that I'm still paying off today. When they both got married, I emptied my savings accounts to give them the weddings of their dreams. Each time, I convinced myself that this was what love looked like, that sacrifice was the purest form of maternal devotion. But somewhere along the way, my sacrifices became expectations. My generosity became an entitlement they never questioned. I became the automatic solution to every financial problem, every crisis, every inconvenience in their lives. The patterns had been building for years, I realize now. Small moments that should have warned me. Like 3 summers ago, when I offered to help Sarah move into her new condo in Lincoln Park. I had taken a day off work, rented a truck, and shown up ready to carry boxes. But when I arrived, Sarah's friends were already there, and she looked almost embarrassed to see me. "Oh, Mom," she had said, barely looking up from her phone. "We've got it handled. Maybe you could just go pick up lunch for everyone?" I became the caterer at my own daughter's moving day. I spent $200 on sandwiches and drinks for her friends, people who barely acknowledged me when I returned. I ate alone in my car while they laughed and worked together inside her new home. The memory stung as I sat in that Chicago rental, but it wasn't the only one. There was Michael's wedding planning, where my opinions were dismissed as old-fashioned. My suggestion for a traditional church ceremony was met with eye rolls and whispered conversations between him and his fiancée. They wanted something modern, contemporary, young. I was relegated to address stuffing and check writing. At the reception, I watched from my assigned table at the back of the room as Michael danced with his new mother-in-law, their heads bent together in intimate conversation. She was only 5 years younger than me, but somehow she was the cool mom, the one whose advice mattered. I was just the one who paid for the open bar. But it wasn't just the big moments. It was the accumulation of small slights, tiny dismissals, casual cruelties that my children probably didn't even realize they were inflicting. Like when I would call to share news about my day, and I could hear the television in the background, or the distracted, responses that told me I wasn't really being heard. Or the time I mentioned feeling lonely after retiring from nursing, and Sarah's response was, "Mom, you should get a hobby or something. Maybe start gardening." As if 43 years of caring for others could be replaced by planting tulips. The worst part was how they talked to me versus how they talked to others. I noticed it during family gatherings, how animated and engaged they became when discussing work, travel, politics, or their friends' lives. But when I tried to contribute to conversations, there would be a subtle shift in energy, a polite but dismissive acknowledgement before they moved on to more interesting topics. I had become background noise in my own family. The financial exploitation had been gradual too. It started with small requests, emergency loans that were never repaid. Sarah's car repair that turned into a down payment on a new vehicle. Michael's business equipment that somehow became a permanent investment I'd never see returns on. My children had learned that I was a reliable ATM, always good for a withdrawal, never expecting a deposit. Over the years, I calculated, I had given them over $300,000. Money from my inheritance when my parents passed, funds I had carefully saved for my own retirement, investments I had liquidated during their various crises. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that they would pay me back when they were more established, that this was what parents did. But the payback never came. Instead, the requests became more frequent, more assumptive. Sarah would text things like, "Mom, can you Venmo me $500? The kids need winter clothes." Not a request, not a plea, just an expectation. And I would do it, every time, because I was afraid of what would happen if I said no. Afraid they would stop calling altogether. The breaking point should have been last spring, when I was diagnosed with pneumonia and spent 4 days in the hospital. I called Sarah and Michael to let them know, expecting at least a visit or a phone call to check on my recovery. Sarah sent a text, "Hope you feel better soon, Mom. Let me know if you need anything." Michael never responded at all. I spent those 4 days alone, listening to the sounds of other patients receiving visits from loving families, watching flowers and balloons accumulate on their bedside tables while mine remained empty. When I was finally discharged, I took a taxi home to my empty house in Rogers Park and realized that if I had died in that hospital bed, it might have been days before anyone noticed. That was when the seed of awareness was planted, though it would take months more for it to grow into action. But first, there was this Christmas trip that I had planned so carefully. I had wanted to recreate the magic of holidays from their childhood, when we would all pile into our old station wagon and drive to my sister's house in Milwaukee, singing carols and sharing hot chocolate from a thermos. I wanted my grandchildren to have those kinds of memories, to understand what family closeness could feel like. I had researched Chicago vacation rentals for weeks, looking for something special. The Lake Michigan property I found had 6 bedrooms, a gourmet kitchen, a fireplace, and stunning views of the city skyline. It cost me $4,000 for the week, money I had saved from my modest pension and Social Security checks. But I convinced myself it would be worth it to see my family happy and together. I handled all the logistics. Booked flights for Sarah's family from Atlanta, where they had moved 2 years ago for her husband's job. Arranged transportation from O'Hare. Stocked the kitchen with everyone's favorite foods, including special dietary items for my daughter-in-law who had recently gone vegan. I created an itinerary of Chicago activities that would appeal to all ages, from the Art Institute to Navy Pier to the Lincoln Park Zoo. The first red flag should have been their reaction when they arrived. Instead of excitement about the beautiful space I had provided, there were immediate complaints. The Wi-Fi wasn't fast enough for my grandson's online gaming. The bedrooms weren't allocated the way Sarah had envisioned. The neighborhood was too quiet for Michael's wife, who had been hoping for something more centrally located. I apologized and tried to fix what I could, but their disappointment hung over the vacation like Chicago's notorious lake effect clouds. I found myself constantly trying to manage their moods, suggesting alternative activities when they seemed bored, offering to pay for additional excursions when they mentioned things they wanted to do that weren't in our original plan. On Christmas Eve, I spent 6 hours preparing a feast that I had planned for weeks. Prime rib with horseradish cream, roasted vegetables, homemade Yorkshire pudding, and 3 different desserts because I couldn't remember everyone's preferences. I set the table with my grandmother's china that I had carefully transported in bubble wrap, lit candles, and put on classical Christmas music. When I called everyone to dinner, they arrived at the table still looking at their phones. Throughout the meal, conversations were fragmented by buzzing notifications and quick responses to texts. My grandson asked if he could eat in front of the TV instead. Sarah's husband spent most of dinner scrolling through work emails. I tried to initiate conversations about family memories, asking if anyone remembered our old Christmas traditions, sharing stories about their grandparents who had passed away. But my words seemed to disappear into the air, acknowledged with distracted nods before attention returned to screens and side conversations. After dinner, I suggested we play board games or watch a Christmas movie together, activities I remembered them enjoying as children. Instead, they scattered to different parts of the house. Sarah and her family went for a walk along the lake without inviting me. Michael and his wife decided to explore downtown bars, leaving me to clean up alone. I stood at the sink washing my grandmother's china by hand, watching the city lights reflect off the dark water outside the kitchen window. The silence in that expensive rental felt more complete than any I had ever experienced. I had paid for everyone to be together, but I had never felt more alone. Christmas morning brought more disappointment. The presents I had carefully chosen and wrapped were opened with polite but underwhelming enthusiasm. The cashmere scarves I had selected for my daughter's in-law were immediately critiqued for color choices. The electronics I had bought for my grandchildren were compared unfavorably to newer models they had been hoping for. But their presents to me revealed the true dynamic of our relationship. A generic candle from Sarah. A gift card to a chain restaurant from Michael. Items that required no thought, no knowledge of my preferences, no investment of time or care. They were the kinds of gifts you give to acquaintances, not to the woman who gave you life and supported you for decades. The final blow came that evening, when I overheard a conversation between Sarah and Michael in the next room. They were discussing their plans for the following day, talking about museums they wanted to visit and restaurants they hoped to try. When I entered the room and asked if I could join them, the silence was deafening. Sarah looked at Michael, Michael looked at his wife, and then Sarah delivered the words that would replay in my mind for months. "Mom, honestly, we were kind of hoping to do some stuff on our own tomorrow. You know, just the younger generation. We move faster and want to see different things." I felt my face flush with embarrassment and hurt. I had paid for this entire vacation, arranged every detail, cooked every meal, and now I was being excluded from the activities because I was too old, too slow, too burdensome for their enjoyment. I excused myself and went to my bedroom, where I sat on the edge of the bed staring at my reflection in the mirrored closet doors. The woman looking back at me seemed ancient, irrelevant, invisible. When had I become someone my own children were embarrassed to be seen with? That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat in the living room with a cup of tea and my photo album. I looked through pictures spanning decades, searching for clues about when things had changed. There was 5-year-old Sarah curled up in my lap reading stories. 10-year-old Michael helping me bake cookies for his school fundraiser. Family vacations where we all genuinely seemed to enjoy each other's company. But even in those older photos, I could see the beginning of the pattern. I was always the one behind the camera, rarely in the pictures myself. I was the organizer, the facilitator, the background support that made everyone else's joy possible. Even then, I was disappearing into my role as caretaker and provider. The text message from Sarah came just as I was putting the photo album away. Those 8 words that confirmed what I had been afraid to acknowledge: I was no longer welcome in my own family story. They wanted young energy, and I was a relic from an older generation that slowed them down and dampened their enthusiasm. I read the message 3 times before setting my phone aside. The financial calculations started running through my mind automatically. The cost of the rental house, the flights, the food, the presents, the activities I had offered to pay for. Over $10,000 for a Christmas vacation where I was made to feel like an unwelcome intruder. But the money wasn't even the real wound. It was the complete lack of gratitude, the casual cruelty of that message, the assumption that I would accept their rejection and quietly fade into the background of their lives. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat by the window watching the sky slowly lighten over Lake Michigan, thinking about all the choices that had brought me to this moment. All the times I had said yes when I should have said no. All the boundaries I had never established, the respect I had never demanded, the value I had never insisted they acknowledge. As the sun rose on December 26th, something shifted inside me. Not an explosion of anger, but a quiet, steady resolve. I was 72 years old, and I had perhaps 10 or 15 good years left. The question was whether I would spend them continuing to accept scraps of affection from people who saw me as an obligation, or whether I would finally start living for myself. The answer came to me as clearly as the morning light streaming through those expensive windows. For the first time in my adult life, I was going to choose myself. The next morning, I woke up before everyone else, which had become my habit over the years. But instead of immediately starting breakfast preparations, I sat quietly with my coffee and made a list. Not a grocery list or an itinerary, but a list of changes I needed to make in my life. First on the list, establish financial boundaries. I had been everyone's emergency fund for too long, depleting my own security to solve problems that my adult children should have been handling themselves. I decided to make an appointment with my financial advisor as soon as we returned home to discuss trusts, limits on access to my accounts, and legal protections for my retirement funds. Second, stop being the automatic solution to everyone's problems. No more last-minute requests that I was expected to fulfill without question. No more assuming responsibility for other people's poor planning or financial mistakes. Third, start saying no. The word had been almost foreign to me for decades, but I realized it might be the key to reclaiming my dignity and self-respect. When the family finally stirred and gathered in the kitchen, they seemed surprised to find me sitting peacefully with my coffee instead of bustling around preparing their morning meal. Sarah asked if I was feeling okay, and I told her I was feeling better than I had in years. We returned home to Chicago on December 28th. During the drive to O'Hare, various family members made casual references to future plans that assumed my automatic participation and financial support. Sarah mentioned wanting to plan a spring break trip to Florida and asked if I could help with the rental house deposit. Michael brought up some equipment he needed for his business and wondered if I could co-sign another loan. I listened without committing to anything, which seemed to puzzle them. Normally, I would have immediately started planning how to make their requests work, calculating what I could afford to contribute, worrying about disappointing them if I couldn't deliver what they needed. Instead, I simply said I would think about it. The phrase felt strange in my mouth, like speaking a language I was still learning to understand. After dropping everyone at the airport, I drove home to my small house in Rogers Park with an odd sense of lightness. The house felt peaceful instead of lonely. For the first time in months, I didn't have to worry about anyone else's needs, moods, or expectations. I could eat what I wanted for dinner, watch what I chose on television, go to bed when I felt tired. That evening, my neighbor Mary knocked on my door with a plate of homemade cookies and asked how the family vacation had gone. Mary was a widow about my age who had moved to the neighborhood 2 years earlier. We had developed a casual friendship built on shared morning walks and conversations over the fence between our small yards. Instead of giving my usual cheerful summary designed to make everything sound perfect, I told Mary the truth. About the dismissive treatment, the exclusion from activities, the text message telling me to stay home next year because they needed young energy. Mary listened without trying to offer solutions or make excuses for my family's behavior. When I finished talking, she simply said, "Eleanor, you deserve so much better than that. Maybe it's time you started living a little for yourself." Her words settled into my heart like seeds finding fertile ground. That night, I called my financial advisor and scheduled an appointment for the following week. I also did something I had never done before. I blocked my children's access to my credit cards and bank accounts. Not permanently, but enough to ensure that any future requests would require actual conversation and consideration rather than automatic approval. The first test came sooner than I expected. On January 3rd, Sarah called asking me to wire $500 to her account for her daughter's dance class registration. It was exactly the kind of request I had been fulfilling without question for years. This time, I paused. I asked her about her husband's job, their holiday spending, their own savings. I suggested that dance classes might be a good opportunity for them to budget and plan as a family rather than relying on last-minute assistance from me. The silence on the other end of the phone stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Sarah said, "Mom, what's gotten into you? You've never made me explain things like this before." She was right. I had never asked for explanations, never suggested they solve their own problems, never treated my assistance as anything other than an automatic entitlement. But I was learning that automatic generosity isn't love, it's enabling, and it had been damaging both of us for years. I told Sarah I would think about her request and call her back. Then I hung up and sat in my kitchen, my heart pounding as if I had just run a marathon. It was the first time I had ever said no to one of my children, and it felt simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. I didn't call her back that day, or the next. On the third day, Sarah called me, her voice tight with frustration and something that sounded almost like panic. She had been forced to have a conversation with her husband about their finances, to look at their budget and make cuts in other areas to pay for their daughter's activity. "I can't believe you're making us struggle like this, Mom," she said. "Especially after we just spent Christmas with you." The accusation stung, but I recognized it for what it was, manipulation designed to restore our old dynamic. Sarah was trying to make me feel guilty for not solving her problem, for forcing her to take responsibility for her own family's expenses. Instead of apologizing and rushing to fix things, I said something that surprised us both. "Sarah, you and David make good money. Your daughter's dance classes are your responsibility as her parents, not mine as her grandmother. I love you, but I'm not going to keep enabling you to avoid taking care of your own family." The call ended shortly after that, and I didn't hear from Sarah for 2 weeks. The silence was painful, but it was also instructive. It showed me how conditional their love had become, how dependent our relationship was on my willingness to serve as their financial safety net. Michael's reaction was different but equally revealing. When his next request for business loan assistance was met with questions about his business plan, profit margins, and repayment schedule, he became defensive and angry. "Mom, I can't believe you're treating me like some stranger at a bank," he said. "I'm your son. Since when do I have to justify asking my own mother for help? Since always, I thought but didn't say. Since the moment you became an adult with your own responsibilities and your own family to support. Since the day you should have stopped seeing me as an automatic solution to your financial problems. But saying that out loud felt too confrontational for the woman I was still learning to become. Instead, I told Michael that I needed to be more careful with my money as I got older, that I wanted to make sure I could take care of myself without becoming a burden to anyone else. His response revealed how little he had ever considered my financial security or future needs. "Mom, you'll always have us. We'd never let anything happen to you." The irony was devastating. My children expected me to bankroll their lives indefinitely, but their promise to take care of me felt hollow when they could barely be bothered to call and check on my health or emotional well-being. As winter turned toward spring, the distance between me and my children became more pronounced. They seemed alternately puzzled and angry about my new boundaries, unsure how to relate to a version of me that wasn't automatically accommodating and generous. But something unexpected was happening to me during those months of reduced contact. Without the constant stress of managing other people's problems and emotions, I felt lighter. I started sleeping better, worrying less, finding small pleasures in daily routines that I had been too busy to notice for years. I joined a pottery class at the local community college, something I had always wanted to try but never had time for when I was constantly available for family emergencies. The feeling of clay taking shape under my hands was meditative and satisfying in a way I hadn't expected. For 2 hours every Tuesday and Thursday, I was simply Eleanor the student, not Eleanor the mother, grandmother, or financial resource. Mary became a closer friend during this period. We started taking longer walks along the Lake Michigan shoreline, talking about books we were reading, places we had always wanted to visit, dreams we had deferred for decades while taking care of other people. She told me about her own experiences with adult children who had taken her generosity for granted, how she had learned to establish boundaries after years of depletion. "The hardest part," she said during one of our walks, "isn't saying no to them. It's forgiving yourself for saying yes for so long." Her words resonated deeply. I realized I had been carrying guilt not just about my new boundaries, but about all the years I had failed to protect my own interests, all the times I had allowed myself to be diminished and taken for granted. Spring brought an unexpected opportunity for me to test my new resolve. Sarah called in late March to tell me about a family reunion being planned for the summer, a gathering of my extended family that would require travel and accommodation expenses. In the past, I would have automatically volunteered to coordinate and pay for everything, seeing it as my role as the family matriarch. Instead, I listened to her plans and concerns without immediately offering solutions. When she finally asked directly if I could help with costs, I said I would contribute what I could afford, but that I expected the other adults in the family to handle their own expenses and share in the planning responsibilities. The conversation that followed revealed how completely my family had me categorized as the automatic problem solver and financier. Sarah seemed genuinely confused about how family events could be organized without me taking on the primary responsibility for logistics and costs. She had never learned to plan or budget for family gatherings because I had always handled everything. "But Mom," she said, "you've always taken care of the family stuff. That's just what you do." "That's just what I do." The phrase echoed in my mind long after our conversation ended. Somewhere along the way, my identity had been reduced to a function, the person who takes care of family stuff. Not Eleanor the individual with her own needs, dreams, and limitations. Just Mom, the caretaker, the problem solver, the open wallet. I decided not to attend the family reunion. The decision felt radical, almost rebellious. I had never missed a family gathering in my adult life, had never prioritized my own preferences over family expectations. But the thought of spending my limited vacation money and emotional energy on an event where I would be expected to serve others while receiving little appreciation or genuine connection felt exhausting rather than appealing. Instead, I planned my own trip. Mary and I decided to visit the Art Institute of Chicago together, to take our time exploring exhibitions we had been meaning to see. We booked a nice lunch at a restaurant overlooking Millennium Park, something I had often suggested to my family but they had always been too busy or uninterested to try. The morning we spent at the museum was a revelation. Without anyone else's schedule or preferences to consider, I could linger in front of paintings that spoke to me, read every placard that caught my attention, sit quietly in the sculpture garden without worrying about anyone else's boredom or restlessness. Mary and I talked about art, about beauty, about the way creativity could flourish when it wasn't constrained by other people's expectations or limitations. I realized I couldn't remember the last time I had had a conversation about ideas rather than problems, aesthetics rather than logistics, possibilities rather than obligations. That afternoon, I did something I had never done in my 72 years, I bought myself a piece of art. Not something practical for the house, not a gift for someone else, but a small watercolor painting of Lake Michigan that captured the way light played across the water during sunrise. It was expensive, more than I would normally spend on something purely for my own pleasure, but it felt like an investment in becoming a person who deserved beautiful things. When I hung the painting in my living room, it transformed the space in a way that surprised me. The room no longer felt like a waiting area for other people's visits, but like a reflection of my own taste and values. It was the beginning of reclaiming my home as a sanctuary for myself rather than a service center for my family. The summer family reunion happened without me, and according to the few photos that were shared, it was significantly less organized and elaborate than gatherings I had coordinated in the past. Sarah called afterward to complain about various logistical problems and expenses that had arisen, clearly expecting me to feel guilty about not being there to prevent or solve them. Instead, I felt a quiet satisfaction that my absence had been noticed and that my contributions over the years had been more significant than anyone had acknowledged. For the first time, my family was experiencing what family gatherings looked like when they had to take responsibility for planning and funding them themselves. But the real breakthrough came in late summer, when I received an unexpected phone call from my youngest grandchild, Emma, who was now 16. She called to ask if she could come visit me for a weekend before school started, not because her parents had suggested it, but because she genuinely wanted to spend time with me. Emma's visit was different from any family interaction I had experienced in years. She was curious about my life, asked about my pottery class, wanted to see the paintings I had been collecting. We cooked together not because I felt obligated to provide a meal, but because we both enjoyed the process of trying new recipes and talking while we worked. Most surprisingly, Emma asked meaningful questions about my life before I became a mother and grandmother. She wanted to know about my nursing career, about what it felt like to work in a hospital during medical emergencies, about whether I had ever thought about traveling or pursuing other dreams. "Grandma," she said as we sat on my back porch watching the sunset, "I never realized you had done so many interesting things. Mom and Dad always just talk about you like you're, just grandma." Just grandma. The phrase stung, but it also illuminated something important. My adult children had been unable to see me as a complete person with my own history, accomplishments, and ongoing potential. To them, I existed primarily in relation to their needs and my willingness to meet them. But Emma saw me differently. Maybe it was her age, or the fact that she wasn't dependent on me financially, or simply that she had inherited a curiosity about people that her parents had somehow lost. Whatever the reason, her visit gave me hope that authentic relationships with my family were still possible, even if they looked different from what I had expected. As we prepared for her to return home, Emma asked if she could come back for another visit during her winter break. But then she said something that changed the entire dynamic of our relationship. "Grandma, next time could I help pay for groceries or gas or something? I have a part-time job now, and it doesn't seem fair that you always pay for everything when I come visit." The offer was small in financial terms, but massive in emotional significance. For the first time in years, a family member was thinking about what they could contribute to our relationship rather than what they could receive from it. Emma was seeing me as a person worthy of consideration and reciprocity, not just as an automatic provider of whatever she needed. Her visit gave me courage to continue establishing boundaries with my adult children, but it also showed me that not all family relationships had to follow the same dysfunctional pattern. Some people, even within my own family, were capable of mutual respect and genuine care. As autumn arrived, I found myself more confident in my new approach to family relationships. When Michael called asking for help with his business expenses, I listened carefully to his request and then offered something different, advice rather than money. I suggested he speak with a financial counselor, research small business loans, or consider scaling back his operations until he could support them independently. He wasn't happy with my response, but something in my tone must have convinced him that arguing wouldn't change my mind. For the first time in our adult relationship, he thanked me for my advice and said he would think about my suggestions. Sarah's reaction to my new boundaries took longer to evolve. For months, she alternated between being angry about my reduced financial support and trying to manipulate me back into old patterns through guilt and emotional pressure. She would call to tell me about financial stress she was experiencing, clearly expecting me to offer immediate assistance. But I had learned to listen without automatically solving. I could empathize with her challenges without taking responsibility for fixing them. I could love her without enabling her dependency on me. The turning point came in late October, almost a year after the Chicago Christmas vacation that had changed everything. Sarah called me crying, overwhelmed by her daughter's college application process and the associated costs. In the past, I would have immediately offered to help with application fees, test prep, or whatever other expenses were causing stress. Instead, I listened. I acknowledged how difficult the process must be. I shared some memories of helping her with her own college applications decades earlier. And then I said something that surprised us both. Sarah, you and David are excellent parents, and you'll figure this out together. I have confidence in your ability to handle this as a family. The call ended without me offering money, without me taking on any tasks related to her daughter's college process, without me accepting responsibility for solving her problem. But it also ended with something that had been missing from our relationship for years: respect for her capability as an adult and a parent. A few days later, Sarah called back with a different energy. She had researched financial aid options, had a conversation with her husband about college funding priorities, and had developed a plan that didn't require rescue from me. More importantly, she sounded proud of herself for handling a difficult situation independently. "Mom," she said, "I think I've been relying on you too much over the years. It actually feels good to figure things out ourselves for once." That conversation marked the beginning of a slow but genuine transformation in our relationship. Sarah started calling me to share news and experiences rather than only contacting me when she needed something. She began asking about my life, my interests, my plans in ways that felt authentic rather than obligatory. But the real test of how much had changed came in November, when I received an invitation that would have been unthinkable a year earlier. Emma called to invite me to her school's art show, where some of her photography would be displayed. But the invitation came with a condition that revealed how much she understood about our family dynamics. "Grandma," she said, "I really want you to come, but only if you want to. Don't come because you think you have to, or because you're worried about hurting my feelings. Come because you're interested in my photography and want to celebrate with me." The sophistication of her emotional intelligence amazed me. At 16, Emma understood the difference between genuine invitation and obligatory inclusion better than most of the adults in our family. She was offering me something I had rarely experienced: the choice to participate based on mutual interest and enjoyment rather than duty and expectation. I went to her art show, and it was one of the most genuinely pleasant family experiences I had had in years. Emma's photography was thoughtful and mature, exploring themes of identity and belonging that resonated deeply with my own recent experiences. We spent time talking about artistic expression, about finding your own voice, about the courage required to share creative work with others. Other family members were there, including Sarah and Michael, but the dynamic was different from our previous gatherings. Without the underlying tension of unmet expectations and financial requests, we could simply enjoy each other's company and celebrate Emma's achievements. During the drive home from the art show, I reflected on how much had changed in less than a year. The relationships that had felt hopeless after that Christmas vacation were slowly transforming into something more honest and sustainable. Not all of my family members had been willing or able to adjust to my new boundaries, but the ones who had were discovering that authentic relationships were more satisfying than transactional ones. But the most significant change was in how I saw myself. For decades, I had derived my sense of worth from how much I could give to others, how many problems I could solve, how indispensable I could make myself to my family's happiness and stability. Now I was learning that real love wasn't about depletion and sacrifice, but about mutual respect and genuine care. I started a blog that winter, writing about the experience of rediscovering yourself after decades of living primarily for others. I called it "Learning to Say No," and I wrote about the challenges and rewards of establishing boundaries with adult children, about finding your own identity after years of being defined by your relationships to others. The response to my blog surprised me. Comments came from women and men all over the country who recognized their own experiences in my words. People who had felt invisible in their own families, who had been treated as automatic solutions to other people's problems, who had lost themselves in the process of caring for others. One comment particularly moved me. It was from a 70-year-old man in Arizona who wrote, "Eleanor, thank you for showing me that it's not too late to start living for myself. I've been everyone's emergency contact for 30 years, and I never realized I had a choice about that. Your story is giving me courage to change my own." Reading responses like that made me realize that my private struggle had universal resonance. The dynamics I had experienced with my own family were playing out in homes across the country, across the world. People were losing themselves in the process of caring for others, accepting treatment that diminished their dignity and worth. But more importantly, people were ready to change. They were hungry for permission to prioritize their own needs, to establish boundaries, to expect reciprocity in their relationships. My blog became a kind of support community for people who were learning to reclaim their lives from patterns of exploitation and neglect. As winter turned towards spring, I realized I was approaching the one-year anniversary of that devastating Christmas vacation. The date held less power over me than I had expected, but it still felt significant as a marker of how much had changed in my life. I decided to commemorate the anniversary by planning another trip, but this time exclusively for my own enjoyment. Mary and I researched art museums in other cities, places we had always wanted to visit but never prioritized. We settled on a week in Santa Fe, New Mexico, known for its vibrant art scene and beautiful landscapes. The planning process itself was a celebration of how much I had changed. Instead of coordinating schedules around other people's needs, managing complex logistics for multiple family members, and worrying about everyone else's satisfaction, I was simply choosing activities that appealed to me and Mary. We booked a small casita near the plaza, made dinner reservations at restaurants we wanted to try, and planned days around museums, galleries, and markets that interested us. For the first time in decades, I was traveling as a person pursuing her own interests rather than as a facilitator of other people's experiences. The trip was revelatory. Santa Fe's artistic community was welcoming and diverse, full of people who had made creativity a priority in their lives. I met artists who had started painting in their 70s, writers who had published their first books after retirement, craftspeople who had discovered their calling after decades in other careers. Their stories resonated with my own journey of late-life self-discovery. Many of them talked about years of putting their creative interests aside to focus on careers, families, and responsibilities. But they had eventually reached a point where they decided to prioritize their own fulfillment, and their lives had been transformed as a result. I bought several pieces of local art during that trip, not as investments or gifts for others, but as expressions of my own evolving taste and identity. Each purchase felt like a small declaration of independence, a statement that I was worth beautiful things, that my preferences mattered, that my home should reflect my own personality rather than serving as a neutral background for other people's lives. When I returned from Santa Fe, my house felt different. Not empty, but peaceful. Not lonely, but serene. I had created a space that nourished me rather than just serving others, and the transformation was visible to anyone who visited. One of my first visitors was Emma, who came for a weekend in early summer. She immediately noticed the changes in my home's decor and atmosphere, and her response was telling. "Grandma, this place feels so much more like you now," she said as she looked at the new artwork and rearranged furniture. "It's like you're finally living in your own house instead of a hotel for other people." Her observation was astute and accurate. For years, I had maintained my home as a service center for my family's needs, guest bedrooms always ready, kitchen stocked with everyone else's favorite foods, living spaces arranged for gatherings and entertainment rather than my own comfort. Now my home reflected my own interests and personality. The walls displayed art I had chosen, the bookshelves held books I wanted to read, and the furniture was arranged for my own relaxation and enjoyment. It was still welcoming to visitors, but it was no longer organized primarily around other people's expectations and needs. That summer brought an unexpected request that tested how much my family relationships had truly evolved. Sarah called to ask if I would be willing to have Christmas at my house again, but with a completely different understanding of roles and responsibilities. Instead of expecting me to coordinate and finance everything, she outlined a plan where family members would contribute both money and labor to create a shared celebration. She had researched catering options to reduce cooking burdens, had discussed gift budgets to prevent overspending, and had even suggested that family members take turns hosting future holidays. The conversation was remarkable not just for its practical considerations, but for its underlying respect for my time, energy, and financial limitations. Sarah was finally seeing me as a family member with my own needs and constraints rather than as an automatic provider of whatever the family required. But more importantly, she was approaching our relationship as a partnership rather than a service arrangement. She wanted my participation because she valued my company, not because she needed my resources or labor. I accepted her invitation with cautious optimism. The previous Christmas had been so painful that I was hesitant to create an opportunity for similar hurt. But I was also curious to see whether our family could create new traditions based on mutual respect and shared responsibility. The planning process was collaborative in ways that felt foreign but refreshing. Family members volunteered for specific tasks, contributed money for shared expenses, and made suggestions for activities that would be enjoyable for everyone. Instead of carrying the entire burden of organization and execution, I was simply one contributor among many. As Christmas approached, I felt cautiously hopeful but also prepared for disappointment. Change is rarely linear, and family dynamics that took decades to develop don't transform overnight. But I had also learned that my own happiness and peace were not dependent on my family's behavior. I could enjoy their company when they were respectful and loving, but I no longer needed their approval or appreciation to feel valuable. Christmas Eve dinner was a revelation. The meal was catered, which meant I could participate in conversations instead of spending hours in the kitchen. Family members had brought contributions ranging from appetizers to desserts, so the table was abundant but no one person was overwhelmed with preparation. Most significantly, the conversation was different. Instead of the distracted, phone-focused interactions of previous gatherings, people were genuinely engaged with each other. They asked about my blog, my art collecting, my travels with Mary. They shared details about their own lives that went beyond surface pleasantries. Emma showed us a portfolio of her latest photography, and the family gathering became an impromptu exhibition of her work. Michael talked about challenges and successes in his business with a maturity that suggested he had learned valuable lessons from managing his own finances. Sarah shared updates about her job and her daughter's college plans without any requests for my assistance or intervention. For the first time in years, I felt like a valued family member rather than a service provider. My presence was appreciated for who I was rather than what I could do for others. It was the kind of Christmas I had always imagined but never experienced. But the real test came on Christmas morning, when I received a gift from Sarah that took my breath away. Instead of the generic presents of previous years, she had commissioned a local artist to create a custom piece based on one of my favorite photographs from our family's history. The photograph showed me holding baby Emma at her christening, both of us laughing at something happening off camera. The artist had transformed it into a beautiful watercolor that captured not just the image but the emotion of that moment. "Mom," Sarah said as I opened the gift, "I wanted you to have something that showed how important you are to our family. Not because of what you do for us, but because of who you are." The gift represented more than just thoughtful selection. It showed that Sarah had been paying attention to my interests in art, that she understood my love for meaningful objects, and that she valued our relationship enough to invest time and creativity in expressing her appreciation. As I held that painting, I realized that the transformation in our family relationships was more complete than I had dared to hope. We had moved from transactional interactions based on my utility to genuine connections based on mutual affection and respect. But perhaps more importantly, I had learned that demanding better treatment didn't destroy relationships, it improved them. The family members who were willing and able to treat me with respect had risen to meet my expectations, and our connections had become stronger and more authentic as a result. The holiday season ended with a new tradition, a family calendar for the coming year that included everyone's contributions to shared events. Birthdays, holidays, and gatherings were marked with notes about who would handle various responsibilities, ensuring that no one person would carry the entire burden of family organization and financing. Looking at that calendar, I felt a sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with external validation and everything to do with internal peace. I had successfully transformed relationships that seemed hopeless into partnerships based on mutual respect. I had reclaimed my identity and dignity without losing the love that mattered most. As I write this story now, nearly 2 years after that devastating Christmas vacation in Chicago, I can see the journey with complete clarity. The pain of that period was necessary to wake me up to patterns that had been damaging me for decades. The loneliness I felt after establishing new boundaries was temporary, but the self-respect I gained has proven permanent. My relationships with my family are better now than they have been in years, precisely because I stopped accepting treatment that diminished my worth. The family members who were capable of change have grown into more mature, respectful relationships with me. The ones who were not ready to change have natural consequences for their choices, but those consequences no longer define my happiness or self-worth. I've learned that love without respect is not love at all, it's exploitation disguised as familial obligation. Real love includes consideration for the other person's needs, appreciation for their contributions, and reciprocity in care and support. Anything less demeans both people in the relationship. My life now is fuller and more satisfying than it has been since my children were young. I have friendships based on genuine mutual interest, hobbies that nourish my creativity, and a home environment that reflects my personality and values. I still love my family deeply, but I no longer need their approval or appreciation to feel valuable. The blog I started has connected me with hundreds of people who have shared similar experiences, and their stories have taught me that my journey is neither unique nor unusual. Many people reach a point in their lives where they realize they have been giving more than they receive, accepting less than they deserve, and losing themselves in the process of caring for others. But I've also learned that it's never too late to change these patterns. No matter how long-standing the dynamics, no matter how entrenched the expectations, it's possible to reclaim your dignity and establish healthier boundaries. It requires courage, consistency, and a willingness to risk temporary discomfort for long-term peace. The most surprising discovery of this journey has been how much energy I had been spending on resentment and management of other people's emotions. When I stopped trying to control how my family treated me and started simply deciding how I would respond to their treatment, my stress levels dropped dramatically. I sleep better now, worry less, and wake up most mornings with a sense of anticipation about my own day rather than anxiety about other people's needs and demands. I've remembered what it feels like to live primarily for yourself while still caring deeply about others, a balance I had lost somewhere in the decades of motherhood and caregiving. My story is still being written, and I'm excited about future chapters in ways that seemed impossible 2 years ago. I have travel plans with Mary, art classes to explore, and creative projects to pursue. I have a family that treats me with respect and appreciation, and friendships that nourish my soul. Most importantly, I have a relationship with myself that is based on love rather than criticism, acceptance rather than constant improvement projects, and confidence in my own worth that doesn't depend on external validation. If my story resonates with you, if you recognize elements of your own experience in my journey, I want you to know that change is possible at any age and at any stage of family relationships. It's not easy, and it's not quick, but it's worth every difficult conversation and every moment of uncertainty. You deserve to be treated with respect by the people you love. You deserve to have your contributions acknowledged and appreciated. You deserve to live for yourself as well as for others, to pursue your own interests and dreams, to be seen as a complete person rather than just a function in other people's lives. It's never too late to start saying no to treatment that diminishes you and yes to experiences that nourish you. It's never too late to reclaim your dignity, your boundaries, and your sense of self-worth. The first step is recognizing that you have choices, even in situations that feel completely determined by other people's expectations and demands. The second step is deciding that your happiness and peace matter as much as anyone else's. The third step is taking one small action that honors your own needs, even if it feels uncomfortable or unfamiliar. Looking back at that Christmas night in Chicago when I sat alone reading my daughter's cruel text message, I can see now that it was the beginning of my liberation rather than just another moment of pain. Sometimes the worst treatment we receive from others becomes the catalyst for the best treatment we learn to give ourselves. My family needed young energy for their Christmas vacations, they said. What I discovered is that I needed mature wisdom for my own life, and I was the only person who could provide it. The energy I found when I stopped depleting myself in service to ungrateful people has been the most vibrant and sustainable energy of my entire adult life. Today, as I sit in my beautiful home surrounded by art I chose and books I want to read, planning trips I'm excited about with friends who value my company, I can honestly say that being excluded from my family's idea of fun was the best thing that ever happened to me. It forced me to create my own version of joy, meaning, and connection, and that version has proven more satisfying than anything I was trying to buy or earn through endless sacrifice and service. If you've been the automatic problem solver in your family, the one who always says yes, the one who picks up the check and cleans up the mess and manages everyone else's emotions, I want you to know that there's another way to live. You can love deeply without losing yourself completely. You can be generous without being depleted. You can maintain family relationships while still prioritizing your own needs and dignity. The people who truly love you will adjust to your new boundaries and learn to appreciate you in healthier ways. The people who can't or won't adjust will reveal that their connection to you is based on what you could do for them rather than who you are as a person. Either way, you'll have clarity about the true nature of your relationships, and clarity is always better than confusion, even when it's painful. The transformation I went through didn't happen overnight, and it wasn't without setbacks and moments of doubt. There were times when I questioned whether I was being too harsh, whether I was destroying relationships that could have been salvaged through more patience and understanding. But what I learned is that relationships built on inequality and exploitation aren't worth salvaging. They need to be rebuilt from the ground up on foundations of mutual respect. One of the most challenging aspects of my journey was dealing with the guilt that came with setting boundaries. For so many years, I had equated love with self-sacrifice, generosity with depletion, and care with automatic availability. Learning to distinguish between healthy giving and unhealthy enabling required re-examining every assumption I had about what it meant to be a good mother, grandmother, and family member. I had to learn that saying no to unreasonable requests wasn't selfish, it was necessary for maintaining healthy relationships. I had to understand that allowing my adult children to struggle with their own problems wasn't cruel, it was giving them the opportunity to develop resilience and problem-solving skills they should have learned years earlier. The guilt was particularly intense during those first few months when my relationships with Sarah and Michael became strained. There were moments when I almost gave in, almost returned to the old patterns because the silence and distance felt so uncomfortable. But Mary and my new friends from pottery class helped me stay strong during those difficult periods. They reminded me that discomfort is often the price of growth, that healthy relationships sometimes require going through difficult transitions, and that the people who truly love you will eventually respect your boundaries even if they initially resist them. The blog became an unexpected source of strength during this period. Reading comments from people who were going through similar experiences, sharing stories and strategies with others who understood the complex emotions involved in changing family dynamics, it all helped me feel less alone and more confident in my choices. One reader wrote to me about her experience with her adult son who had been borrowing money for years without repaying it. She said my story had given her the courage to write up a formal loan agreement for their next transaction, complete with repayment schedule and consequences for default. Her son was initially angry about the businesslike approach to family lending, but he ultimately respected her more for treating their financial relationship with seriousness and dignity. Another reader shared how she had stopped automatically hosting every family gathering and started rotating responsibilities among different family members. She said it was amazing to discover how much more she enjoyed family events when she could participate as a guest rather than always serving as the event coordinator and primary host. Stories like these reinforced my belief that what I was going through wasn't just personal healing, it was part of a larger cultural shift toward healthier family dynamics, especially for women who had been socialized to put everyone else's needs before their own. The changes in my daily life became more apparent as the months passed. Without the constant stress of managing other people's crises and emotions, I found energy for activities and interests that I had neglected for years. I started reading fiction again, something I had always loved but had set aside when I became overwhelmed with family responsibilities. I joined a book club at the local library, where we discussed novels and memoirs that explored themes of identity, relationships, and personal growth. The conversations were intellectually stimulating in ways that reminded me of my younger self, the woman who had been curious about ideas and passionate about learning before she became defined primarily by her roles as wife, mother, and caregiver. The book club members came from diverse backgrounds and life experiences, but many of us were women in our 60s and 70s who were rediscovering ourselves after decades of focusing on others. We talked about books, but we also shared stories about our journeys towards self-acceptance and independence. One woman in the group, Patricia, had gone back to college at age 68 to finish a degree she had started 40 years earlier. Another, Dolores, had started a small business making jewelry after her husband's retirement forced her to reevaluate her own goals and interests. Their stories inspired me to think about what other dreams and possibilities I might explore in the years ahead. I also started attending cultural events in Chicago that I had always wanted to try but never prioritized. Mary and I became regular patrons of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, something that had seemed too expensive and indulgent when I was constantly depleting my resources for family needs. Now I understood that spending money on experiences that brought me genuine joy was not selfish, it was an investment in my own happiness and well-being. The Symphony Hall became one of my favorite places in the city. Sitting in those beautiful surroundings, listening to music that moved my soul, I felt connected to something larger than my own daily concerns and family dramas. It was a reminder that there was a whole world of beauty and meaning beyond the narrow sphere of obligation and service that had consumed so much of my energy for so many years. My relationship with Emma continued to deepen in ways that surprised and delighted me. She had begun calling me regularly, not because she needed something, but because she genuinely enjoyed our conversations. She would tell me about her classes, her friends, her thoughts about college and career possibilities. But she also asked about my life in ways that showed real interest and curiosity. During one of our phone conversations, Emma mentioned that she had been thinking about my blog and the changes I had made in my life. She said it had made her more aware of how she wanted to approach relationships in her own life, how she wanted to make sure she was giving as much as she was receiving in her friendships and family connections. "Grandma," she said, "watching you learn to take care of yourself has been really inspiring. It's making me think about what I want my life to look like when I'm older, and how I want to make sure I never lose track of who I am just because I love other people." That conversation filled me with pride and hope. If my journey toward self-respect and boundary setting could serve as a positive example for Emma as she navigated her own relationships, then all the difficult moments and uncomfortable transitions had been worth it. The second Christmas after my transformation was even more successful than the first. By then, the new patterns of shared responsibility and mutual respect had become more natural for everyone. Family members arrived with specific contributions they had committed to, conversations were more balanced and engaged, and I felt like a celebrated participant rather than a service provider. But perhaps more importantly, I felt completely comfortable in my own skin throughout the entire holiday. I wasn't constantly monitoring everyone else's mood and satisfaction, worrying about whether the food was good enough or the activities were entertaining enough. I had learned to enjoy family time without feeling responsible for everyone else's happiness. The gifts were more thoughtful across the board, suggesting that the cultural shift toward greater consideration and reciprocity was becoming internalized by the whole family. Michael gave me a beautiful scarf that he had clearly chosen with my taste and interests in mind. Sarah presented me with a gift certificate for a pottery workshop that I had mentioned wanting to try. Emma surprised me with a photo album she had created documenting our visits together over the past year. But the most meaningful gift was the general atmosphere of appreciation and respect that pervaded the entire celebration. Family members thanked me for hosting, complimented the contributions I had made to the meal and decorations, and included me in conversations and activities as a valued participant rather than a background facilitator. During a quiet moment on Christmas evening, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat in my living room looking at the family photos that Emma had compiled in her gift album. There we were at the art museum, working together in my kitchen, sitting on my back porch talking about her photography. The images captured something I had rarely seen in family photos before: genuine joy and connection between two people who truly enjoyed each other's company. Looking at those pictures, I realized that this was what healthy family relationships looked like. Not one person constantly giving while others constantly took, not automatic sacrifice disguised as love, but mutual enjoyment and reciprocal care. I had finally learned the difference between enabling and nurturing, between martyrdom and generosity. As I write the final chapters of this story, I'm filled with gratitude for that painful Christmas night 2 years ago when I felt so alone and dismissed. That moment of crisis became the beginning of my liberation, the catalyst for changes that have made my life richer and more meaningful than I ever imagined possible. I'm 74 now, and I have every intention of living many more years with the same energy and purposefulness that I've discovered in this new phase of my life. I have art classes to take, books to read, places to visit with Mary, and conversations to have with new friends I'm constantly meeting through my various activities and interests. My relationship with Sarah has evolved into something I never thought possible: a genuine friendship between two adults who respect each other's autonomy and value each other's perspectives. She calls me for advice sometimes, but she also shares her own insights and experiences in ways that enrich my understanding of the world. We have conversations about books, politics, parenting challenges, and career decisions that feel like exchanges between equals rather than one-sided service relationships. Michael has grown into a more mature and responsible adult, partly because I stopped enabling his dependency on me. His business is now profitable enough to support his family without constant emergency assistance from me, and he seems proud of what he has accomplished through his own efforts. Our conversations have become more substantial and meaningful because they're not constantly focused on his financial needs and my automatic solutions. But it's my relationship with Emma that continues to surprise and delight me most. She's now in college, studying photography and art history, and she credits our conversations about creativity and self-expression with helping her choose her academic path. She visits me regularly, not out of obligation, but because she genuinely enjoys my company and values our connection. Last month, Emma brought her boyfriend to meet me, and I was touched by how she introduced me. Instead of simply saying, "This is my grandmother," she said, "This is Eleanor, my grandmother, who's also an artist and writer and one of the most interesting people I know." Her words reflected the complete person she saw in me, not just the family role I had been reduced to for so many years. The blog has grown beyond anything I ever expected. I now have thousands of regular readers from around the world, people who share their own stories of learning to set boundaries, reclaim their identities, and create healthier family dynamics. The comment section has become a support community where people offer encouragement, advice, and solidarity to others who are going through similar transformations. I've been invited to speak at several conferences about aging, family relationships, and women's empowerment. The idea that I would have something valuable to share with others about these topics would have seemed impossible just a few years ago, when I felt invisible and irrelevant in my own family story. But now I understand that my experience is both deeply personal and universally relevant. The struggles I went through with my children are part of larger cultural patterns about gender roles, family expectations, and the way we often lose ourselves in the process of caring for others. My journey towards self-respect and healthy boundaries offers hope and practical strategies to others who feel trapped in similar dynamics. Looking ahead, I have clear goals and dreams that are entirely my own. Mary and I are planning a trip to Italy next spring, something we've been dreaming about for months. I'm working on expanding my blog into a book that might help even more people navigate the challenges of creating healthier family relationships later in life. I'm also considering taking some classes at Northwestern University, not to pursue a degree, but simply to engage with ideas and learning in ways that nourish my intellectual curiosity. The thought of being a student again, learning for the pure joy of discovery rather than to serve someone else's needs, fills me with excitement. Most importantly, I wake up every morning with a sense of possibility and purpose that has nothing to do with what other people need from me and everything to do with what I want to create and experience in my own life. I have learned to be selfish in the healthiest sense of the word, committed to my own growth, happiness, and well-being in ways that make me a better friend, family member, and human being. The woman who sat alone in that Chicago rental house 2 years ago, devastated by her family's dismissal and cruelty, was already carrying within her everything she needed to create the life she's living today. She just needed the wake-up call of that painful experience to begin the journey toward reclaiming her dignity and worth. If you're reading this and recognizing elements of your own story, I want you to know that transformation is possible at any age. The patterns that have defined your family relationships for years or decades can be changed. The roles that have made you feel invisible or taken for granted can be redefined. The future can look completely different from the past, no matter how entrenched and hopeless things might seem right now. The first step is recognizing that you deserve better. The second step is believing that change is possible. The third step is taking one small action that honors your own needs and dignity, even if it feels uncomfortable or unfamiliar. You don't have to accept scraps of attention and appreciation from people who should be celebrating and cherishing you. You don't have to deplete yourself financially and emotionally to prove your love. You don't have to disappear into the background of other people's stories when you have every right to be the protagonist of your own. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family story? Have you ever paid for experiences you were then excluded from enjoying? Have you known the specific pain of being taken for granted by the people you love most? Your story matters, and your experience is valid. Please share it in the comments below, because your words might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to begin their own journey toward dignity and self-respect. If this story touched something in your heart, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Together, we can keep opening our hearts and sharing the truth about what it means to love others while still honoring ourselves. Thank you for listening, and thank you for having the courage to consider that you, too, deserve better.